Hi writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Joni, Author Relations Manager at Kobo Writing Life.
And I'm Laura, Author Engagement Manager at Kobo Writing Life.
On today's episode, we are chatting with Nana Malone. It is not the first time she's been on the podcast, but we truly can never hear enough of what Nana has to say. It was a really, really great chat. We had to bring it to a halt because we really could have just talked to her all afternoon.
We talked to Nana about her covert affairs duet with Kobo Originals, modeling for her own covers, and what she looks for in a romance novel.
Yeah, she's part of the judging panel of the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize this year. So we were able to chat a little bit about what makes great romance. She gave some tips for writing and talks about how she dictates her books. It's a great interview. We hope you enjoy it. We are excited to be joined today by Nana Malone. Thank you so much for doing this.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I do not think you need much of an introduction. I think most of our listeners are familiar with you, but for anyone that's new, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Nana Malone, Nana from Ghana. And yes, I'm actually from Ghana. The accent, I know, is a little tricky, but I write sexy, feel-good romance, usually fun, exciting on the lighter side, but with a touch of suspense.
And you worked on a recent project with Kobo Originals, the Covert Affairs Duet. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what your experience was like?
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. So I was approached by Kobo to do a duet. And the best part about that is they were like, look, do everything in your wheelhouse. We don't care what it is. We're so excited, anything you have to offer. And I was like, wait, can I do suspense? And they're like, yep, you can do suspense. And I was like, a diverse cast are like, go for it. And so I did what is the core of who I am. And I took that show, essentially kind of La Femme Nikita, but the awesome Canadian version, not that nonsense Hollywood CW version. And I changed it, made it a little lighter, a little funner, and I made the heroine African-American. And then I took a little bit of a dating concept, like what if you did dating app and everything about your application was a lie in theory, but they matched you with someone else who had the exact same profile, and he's also an undercover spy. So those are kind of the fun things that I did there. And that was so fun. I had such a great time. Lyra and Marcus were a really great couple. And it was like the kind of like dating, but you're hiding who you are, which is like real dating where you're trying to put your best foot forward. You're like, but I'm not only a spy, I'm actually a real life girl. But it was really fun and entertaining. And then of course, hijinks ensue. So that was really great. And I loved everything about it. And that world was so great. And one of my favorite parts is that Kobo is such a great at international outreach that it's already been translated into a couple of languages. So that was really exciting for me because that's always the thing that you want as an author. And you're like, I want people in every country to read it. So that's very exciting.
Is there anywhere really unexpected that people are reading your books?
Yeah. I mean, which it's weird. Slovenia. I'm like, I hear you, but great. Awesome. I'm here for it. Every now and again, I'll check. I mean, I have a lot of South Africans, I'm from the continent. So I was like, okay, South Africa maybe makes sense. Yeah. Slovenia was probably one of the most. And then randomly Sri Lanka. I'll take Sri Lanka. And let's see. Yeah. Those are probably the most kind of oh, that's interesting.
Reading in English in Slovenia?
Yes, they are reading in English because I can't see my...
your translations are...
Yeah, I can't see my translation stuff. Mm-hmm. So for my English titles, I'm like, that's great. Whenever I have a sale in someplace unexpected, I run and tell my husband, I'm like, I'm very big in Slovenia.
That's really cool. Do you have a lot of readers in Ghana?
I don't, which is odd. I think the Ghanaian readers are probably reading on other vendors, because Amazon has a big presence there. And then there are people with their iPhones all the time. So they're probably, I would assume. But when I look on Kobo, I'm like, guys, where are you? I mean, Nigeria is there, which is also not unexpected. They're our neighbors. But I'm like, Ghana? Because I do a lot of when I go home, I'll do readings and signings. And I'm like, just know I'm here. What's up? But I think Ghanaians also really like their paperbacks.
Okay.
Because that's the number one thing I get asked for. So whenever I travel, I'll ship some. And, I'll sign them all. And then there's a couple little bookstores and boutiques and stuff that I'll store at.
So one of my favorite parts of the Covert Affairs Duet was all the different action scenes that you got to write. So can you tell us a little bit about how you wrote those and kind of blocked out the scenes?
Yeah. So one of the fun things is I used to do Krav Maga, which is it's an Israeli fighting technique. And I blew out my shoulder many years ago, so I don't practice as much anymore. But my husband also does Shotokan karate, and he's a 4th-degree black belt. And so it's really handy to like kind of visualize in my mind, like how I want to fight scene to go. I'm like, well, this is how it has to end. And I think this will be cool and that'll happen. And I'll have already kind of like made bullet points of like, especially when I use props, but then what will usually happen, I'm like, babe, come here. I want to try this out. And he's like, he just shakes his head and he gets up and I was like, can I do this? Like if I elbow you, can I come back and then like groin strike? And I'm like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. What was I thinking? Because I'm like, no, I'm right arm dominant. If I use that, I was like, and then I can't get my hips in the right location for a groin strike. And I was like, never mind, it's fine. And he's like, that's it. That's all I get. And then our daughter used to do judo too. So she like wants to get in on the game because she thinks it's like playtime. And I'm like, no. Plus she doesn't know how to use a lot of control yet. So one of us usually gets hurt and that's me.
I love that you guys are such a kick-ass family that you're like physically blocking out what the fight scenes are for the book. That's so cool.
That also makes so much sense. Like it didn't occur to me that you would actually get up and walk through it, but yeah.
I mean, well, it's funny. I dictate to write. So I'm usually walking around anyway. And so what's funny is like, I'll be doing a scene and it's just like a talking scene where they're in a room or she's with a friend or something. And I'm walking and doing it kind of like you'd be walking along the halls of an office or, like your super secret spy center or whatever the case is. So I'm walking and making turns and I'm like, they'll stop to do something and I'll stop to also do something. So my hands are also moving as I'm doing it. It's really funny watching me as I dictate a book.
Do you always dictate?
Yes. Ever since that shoulder injury, it's not conducive to long periods of typing because typing, you're moving your arms a lot, like back and forth, even if they're like in a braced position, they're moving. And so that motion back and forth in that kind of like L makes my shoulder go clickety clack and do unhappy things. So it's not ideal for long term. When I edit, I type sometimes, or I'll use like a tablet. Like I use Pages, like an Apple, and I'll use that to manually edit, or I'll print it out and I'll write on it and someone will input for me. But when I'm putting the story down, it's always dictated.
Yeah, we've talked to a couple of authors that do that, and it's fascinating to me. I imagine the learning curve is quite steep to getting used to saying it out loud.
Yeah, it was odd. I think Cheeky Royal was my first fully dictated book. And then when I did that one, that actually wasn't too bad because I was typing the book and then I was saying it as I typed to get used to saying the punctuation, which can be very difficult, especially that's the number one thing. A lot of authors will be like, you dictate, how do you punctuate? And I'm like, I see it in my head, like I'm typing it. And then I'm like, okay, comma, close quote, she said, that's the kind of thing. So I did that. And I think 3 chapters in, I just abandoned the typing.
I think it's also interesting that it gives you the opportunity to move around while you're writing, because that's not something you would usually get. Do you find that it changes the way that you write at all?
Not now, but I think in the early days, probably yes. I was a lot more cognizant of where I was and, a little bit shyer, because sometimes you got to you're in the car pickup line and you're sitting there dictating and, a mom walks by and she wants to have a conversation. And you're like, I'm on the phone and you're worried people can hear you. But, I think there was this was a few years ago when we first moved to our new place in San Diego and they were doing construction in our house. I was on a very tight deadline and I had to get the book done. And so I was outside of a Starbucks walking back and forth, dictating, I think, the love scene with in full view and full hearing of whoever was happening to be sitting outside on that patio. But I did not care because it had to get done. And that was one of the first times that I kind of let go of any, because before I had to, I'm like, oh, no one's in the house. It had to be quiet in the house. Because mostly I don't care, I hear something because I can usually, it's like when you see a musician, they sing, they're right in the mic. So that's not the problem. I was just worried they would hear me and I'm like, whoa, it's not perfect coming out. But now I honestly do not care. Now, I'm in my office, my daughter will be in the living room and I'm just dictating away. Don't care. Just going for it. So your inhibitions get lower the longer you do it, I think.
That's really interesting because I would think I would be very self-conscious, but yeah, you get used to everything.
Yeah. A lot of people still are, and they've been doing it for years, but I think the necessity of having to just be outside. I mean, I dictate in the car. I'm in car pickup for school. I will be on the way to a doctor's appointment. It's mic on and I'm getting the scenes in, which is great. So I'm not like stuck in the house, which is nice. But in the early days, you were absolutely like, I'll do it in a doctor's office. I don't care.
This is excellent bonus content for any fans of yours that happen upon you.
Oh yeah, they'll be like, oh, is that her? Is she dictating? Because like, especially if you have an appointment, I'll go and usually they're not ready right away. So like, if you don't have paperwork to fill out, I'm just like, hey, I'm just right outside the door, So if you're just open and like shout out for me, I'm right there. And then I'll just like get in a quick, 15 minutes. And usually that's like 500 words at least. So I got some words in at the doctor's office without having to stop my flow.
Have you found that you've like increased your word count since you started dictating, or is it kind of the same?
It's funny. That's a question people ask because they assume dictation is faster, but I think it's the same. Because when I used to type, I would use this app called Write or Die. I don't know if it's still around as a software program. And you can make it more difficult for yourself if you're prone to distraction by doing kamikaze method, which is if you stopped writing, it would start to delete words. Now, when I was first writing, I needed that because it was so easy to get distracted by anything. And I would write in sprints because I was working full time. I had a baby. I was like, anything can be done in 15 minutes. You can put laundry in 15 minutes. You can wash a dish in 15 minutes. You can do it. So I would take these 15-minute chunks and they were always spread out throughout the day, like first thing in the morning at like 5 a.m. I'd be up, those kind of things. And then it's like, okay. And then the baby, and then I can do like 15 minutes at lunch. And so before I knew it, I would have all these words. So I learned to type very quickly and at least get the ideas out. I was like, well, anything can be fixed. So at that point I could get about 500 words in 15 minutes. Were they great words? No, but that's how I fast draft anyway. And so the magic comes in the editing process, which I don't love, but that's the slower, do I want it to sound like this? Or should it say this? Or, that word, what's that word again? Get the thesaurus out and that kind of thing. That's when that happens in the edit and for me, the revision phase, but like to get the story down, to make it out of my head, I learned to write really fast and to just do it. And so dictation isn't any faster for me.
So to swing back a little bit to the Covert Affairs books, we were talking about the character of Lyra and how she is very badass and she's a lot of fun. Was she based on anyone in your life?
I think all my characters are based like on a conglomeration of people. Her mentor figure was based on someone I knew. Like that person's awesome, but like the original like mentor character, no spoilers, had like turned out how you want the mentor character to turn out. Then like she was based on someone that I know and who's a very close friend of mine, who was a great mentor to me, when I was still in corporate world. And Lyra, they're all me. All the characters are me. They're just me. But she has like fun, funny, like sayings and quirks from my best friend. And she's more fearless than I am. She just kind of like dives right in. I have other friends like that. So you end up taking bits and pieces. And when I'm usually conceptualizing a character, I'm like, I think to like a TV or movie character that I loved, but like how to like improve upon them, or like Lorelai Gilmore, but she's not as messy, or like, so then I'm like, oh, well, okay. So if that's the case, then what does that mean? It's like, she talks really fast. She's sometimes impulsive, but, she has her stuff together at work and, her family dynamics are great and cool and like all those things. But like, I've taken like a very, like a specific, like cutout of that character. And I'm like, oh, that's what I mean by she's fast talking, drinks probably more coffee than she should, eats a lot of like gummy bears or whatever, but at the same time, she's not messy. She doesn't have a kid. It's like all the things that make Lorelai Gilmore aren't part of that character, but I just took that one snapshot and I'm like, oh, that's a fun piece. And then you build the character out further from there.
I love that. Yeah, it's kind of like a build your own adventure with a character. Like you're just stealing bits of everything you like. That's awesome. One of the other things that I loved about these books is the covers, and you actually modeled for them. So can you tell us how that came about?
I sure did model for those. Well, at the end of 2020, as you guys know, the uprisings in the United States and around the world were, really important and like the start of something great and movement. And at the time I wanted to do, start doing things that were like the things that you do in publishing that in the early days, because I've been around, I'm like from the Paleolithic era of romance. And back in the day, I used to put Black models on covers all the time. I was like, well, she's Black, let's go. Like, I didn't even think about it, but you would see that like at a certain point, my sales plateaued and they were just started to get flat. And I was having a hard time growing. And, you start experimenting with what you can do to fix that. And I was very adamant that I was writing books about predominantly women of color. Like I always say the guys are interchangeable. I'm like, look, it could be Idris, it could be Brad Pitt, it could be Timothée Chalamet. I don't care. Equal opportunity, fine. But the women, I want them to look like me and my family and my friends. And by and large, that's what a large number of my heroines are. I think like 80% of them are women of color. And I used to put them on the covers all the time and then sales flattened out. So I started experimenting. So, well, I'm not changing the content, but I can fiddle with the covers and see what happens. I started putting a lot of very pretty men on the cover, objects on the cover, and people have internalized biases. So the book started to perform better. And then, but sure enough, you get in, it's like, is that a brown nipple? What in the world? But after 2020, I was talking to my publicist and she's like, it's time to go back. And I was like, which is very terrifying because if you have a marketing thing that has worked for you, you're like, oh God, why would I change it? But we took some books that, she hated the covers of already. She did not like those men on the covers. And we just said, let's find a model. But one of the most difficult things, if anyone is an author and has like gone to the dregs of stock photography, it is impossible to find women of color. And I needed a Black woman who was dark skinned like I am and in a princess dress and with a hot guy. And like they needed to clearly look like they were a couple, not just like photoshopped standing next to each other awkwardly. And that photo did not exist anywhere. And so we started calling photographers to see if they were available or had any models in stock that could shoot. They didn't even have Black models available. And which was, signifying something like really major and important, that it's still, as far as we've come in the year 2021 or 2020 at that time, you still couldn't find these models, or people just weren't shooting them because quote unquote, they don't sell or whatever. So I called a photographer of mine and I was like, hey, is your one model available that I knew he had? And he was like, actually, no, she's pregnant. And my publicist looked at me and she's like, you're just going to need to do these. And I was like, what? And so I did those. And when it came time to do the Kobo covers, we were talking about it. We're going to do illustrated. And I was like, that's not really the tone of my books because that's more of a rom-com feel. And I was like, well, these are light and fun and funny. They're not really rom-com. And they were like, okay, great. We'll find, some stock photos. And I was like, you can look, but let me tell you. And I remember Michelle was like, there's no way, of course we can. And then like, it took like a half a day of searching and she came back. She's like, we can't. So what are we going to do? And Nina, of course, was like, she's like lifted my publicist. She just lifted up the bus and was like, Nana, just get underneath there. Get it. And I was like, again? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And, the Kobo team was so supportive, like, because as soon as they heard it, Michelle was like, yes. And I was like, not again. But it was actually really fun. We used a new photographer I've never used before, a new model I'd never used before. And one of the great things is we could come up with a concept together. And we all loved the idea of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is kind of how I'd started conceptualizing the books as part, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Alias, all those kind of like fun, actiony TV shows and movies. And so we used the comp of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And so we shot me in that concept, it was really fun, but it's always nerve wracking if it's you on the cover, like you take it personally if people don't like the book, because otherwise, as if it's not you, you're just like, oh, some things don't sell, but it feels personal when it's you. Although I have many books, so I've learned to separate a little, but yeah, it was a really fun shoot. And photographer Brandon Sosa did an amazing job. He's so talented, and the rest is history.
Okay, but I have to ask, you have a background in modeling, right? You're not just like, because these photos are beautiful. Like if they asked me to randomly stand in because there were no models, like they wouldn't look like that.
They're gorgeous covers, really gorgeous. Yeah.
Thank you. I have done a little modeling, but nothing for book covers until that original photographer, Wander Aguiar. He's a friend. And I bought images from him before. And I remember I'd never met him, until a signing one time. And he comes up to me and he's like, I'm going to shoot you. And I was like, you're going to have to clarify when you say shoot me, That can mean a lot of things. What are we talking about here? He's like, you're going to model for me. And I was like, the hell I am. Wander is very persistent. And he just keeps like hounding you until you say yes. And I had like a full, like I had been reading Shonda Rhimes' The Year of Yes. That book messed me up, man. And I started saying yes to all these things. And finally I just called Wander. I was like, fine, yes, I will model. But the great thing about Wander is he doesn't just like throw you in and be like, well, stand there and give me face. You know, he really walks you through what to do with your face, what to do with your body, what angles you're looking for, what are your best angles. So you'll see there's a lot of photos of me in profile, like so many, because I prefer it because you can see my neck. Like, and he's like, the neck. And it's like the one thing I hate about my face, which is my jaw. Like, I'm just like, oh, to me, it's always like too long. He's like, nope, that's your thing. That's perfect. That's what I want to see. And so he showed me what to do with my face. So by the time I got to Brandon, I was like, okay, I do know what to do kind of. And photographers, if they're really good, are actually really helpful. So if you are feeling brave, you could be on a book cover too. Just find a good photographer. Just got to be brave. That's it.
I know it's only been 2 years, but has anything changed since 2020 in terms of finding stock pictures? Any improvements at all? It's a big gap in the market. Somebody needs to get in there.
I think that there are some more, like there's more availability. There's some, some photographers of color that are like really making it a point to shoot more marginalized communities, which I think is great. I think that the difficulty is in that for us in romance is that romance is so specific. Right. It's like you need the couple. If you're going to do a couple shot, right, you need them to look like they're in love and you need them to be like this close. And we're still in COVID time. So that is slightly tricky. But also it's like you'll get people being like, well, I don't know where to find Black models. And I'm like, I've seen you run after a pretty blonde girl on the street and be like, wait, please come. I mean, I was like, there are women of color everywhere that are like stunningly gorgeous. If you can do that, I'm sure you can. So like, I think, and a lot of models were like, oh my God, that was such a boss move. Authors were like, I can't believe you did that. That was so great. And I was like, guys, that was a necessity thing that I did both times out of necessity because those photos didn't exist. What we need is photographers to really understand that those photos can sell books. Those photos can do well and to have more of them available, not for authors to then be like, well, let me just get my lingerie out and do it myself. That's not the actual solution. I am capable of solving my own problems, but that's not the solution I'm talking about. So not a lot has changed. There are, like I said, there are more, I think, photographers of color taking more stock photography. The thing is, it's not really romance ready. So you'll go and you'll be like, oh my God, this Black girl, she's so beautiful and amazing and great. And you can use that for maybe an ad, but it's not ideal for a cover because the guys sell covers and couples sell covers really. And nowadays people are also doing kind of like alternate covers as well as an experiment. But like historically, people like to see the face. And they like to see a couple that look like they're going to embrace it any given moment. And so we're not really seeing that yet. So there's still a lot of room for growth there, I think.
Big opportunity for somebody that's willing to.
Yes.
So in general, you are a champion for diversity in romance. Can you talk a little bit to us about the Burn Nipple Challenge?
So that was kind of my little piece of 2020 that I was like, I want to do something that I can sustain and not just do it in like a moment and then just kind of be like, oh, well, I'm done now. And something that's sustainable and can like have an impact moving forward for years to come if that's what I choose to do. And so it's essentially a book club because I would and for years I've gotten people being like, oh my God, I want to read more diversely. And I was like, okay, great. That's awesome. I love this journey for you. And then they would just have the nerve to look me dead in the face and be like, but I don't know where to find these books. I mean, especially if it's coming from a friend, you're trying not to be super snarky, but you're like, is your Google broken? Because if you just smoothie on over and you type in diverse romance, so many names pop up. It's, or like African-American romance or interracial romance. It's right there. Google is such a great tool. It's so easy. It's at the fingertips and nobody wants to do the work. Or if they are reading diversity, they're like, yes, oh my God, I love reading diverse books. I read books by, and then they rattle off 4 or 5 authors, the same ones, always the same ones. And I'm like, I love Beverly Jenkins is amazing. That's, in the 90s, that's where half of us were like, oh my God, brown people on covers. This is great. Kennedy Ryan's a very good friend of mine. Like, she is amazing. But there are thousands of other Black and brown authors writing romance. So many. We're all just there. And these books are amazing and great. And sometimes just being overlooked, or they haven't had the same access like I have, or haven't been as lucky as I have, I've been around a long time, made a lot of mistakes, but I've also had some great mentors and friends and people who've been like, come on, I just learned about this thing. Come do it too, because if you don't have access to some of these spaces, you miss out. Like if I didn't know some of the people that I knew, I wouldn't have found out about like Sky Warren's ads class or whatever, I just wouldn't have known. And I wouldn't have been able to then grow my career from knowing just even a little bit of nugget of information. So I started this book club where I just highlight books that I love by all diverse authors. Like, it's pretty simple. And I was like, and all I asked, I said, if anyone wanted to do it, great, join me. Also host your own Brown Nipple challenge. I wanted people to, because they're speaking to their audience and people who love their books, pick an author who writes the same kinds of things that you do. If you write small town romance, go pick up a Farrah Rashan or someone like that who is writing small town romance, and the author's diverse, and you see what you come up with. But like, what would happen is people are like, oh my God, I want to do this famous like Black and brown author, one of the 5 that I want to do their book. And I was like, but that's not what you write. What they write, social justice books, is very different than your small town, very lily white. Your readers are going to have a hard time making that large jump. As amazing as this book is, talk about this book. This book is amazing. You should definitely talk about them. But if you're doing a Brown Nipple challenge, why don't you pick something that's an easy jump for your readers so they can go, oh, why was I so scared or resistant or whatever to reading something by someone who didn't look like me? That makes no sense. And then the big thing is, I think people, once they really connect to an author or they see someone and they can go, oh, they're fun. I know them. Like, you feel like, the interwebs does that to you with this parasocial relationship where you think you know someone. But that's really helpful for authors, because when you can see their personality and you think you know them, you're more likely, when you see their name come up on an ad or in a newsletter or whatever, you're going to be like, click. I met them that one time on the internet and they were awesome. And so once we have the book club and I make everyone buy it and I trumpet them, I share them in my newsletter for a month, and everyone's meant to be reading or listening to the audio if that's how you prefer your reading material. And then we'd have a chat with the author and just talk about their writing process and the book, and sometimes why they made the characters do what the things that they did. Sometimes I'm upset because I don't like the secondary character, and so I make them explain themselves. And just really kind of just like have everyone just meet them, get to know them. And it's a very like informal chat, but like a lot of readers have said after that, they're like, oh, she's so fun and amazing. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Isn't she great? And if it makes even just like 5 people go, well, I've never read a book by her, and now I have to go read her whole backlist. And I'm like, that's the whole point, to put money in marginalized authors' pockets and go, yeah. And to give them even a slight sliver of access that I have and be like, hey, I've kept the door ajar. Come on in. It's nice in here. They're readers, and there's money to be made.
Yeah, it's a win-win. Readers discovering new authors and discovering someone with a backlist they haven't explored yet.
Yeah, that's always a fun surprise when you just you discover a book and you're like, what else have they? And then they've got like 10 to 20 books and you're like, oh, it's like that. It's going to be a minute. Excellent. Excellent. And then you just go down this rabbit hole. It's really great.
It's the best feeling.
Speaking of backlist, you have a pretty big one. You've been writing for a while now. So how has your writing process kind of changed throughout your career?
Oh, that's a good one. It's a long backlist, like you said. I think in the early days, well, one of the main ways that it's changed is that I wrote primarily standalones for the first 30 to 40 books in my career. I forgot, I've lost count, but I wrote primarily standalones in series, but still standalones. And then my, cliffhanger journey started when I did a co-write with a friend, the Shameless series. And you could really see the trickle through, and not just having one book and then hoping that they like the secondaries enough to continue. And so I was like, these cliffhangers are nice. This is guaranteed money. I mean, as long as the story calls for that, obviously. But for my solo endeavors with Cheeky Royal, I intended to go back to single titles. That was the plan. I was writing a single title book. I was minding my business and I wrote Cheeky Royal and everything was great. And I got to basically essentially the Black moment. And I was like, if I wrote cliffhangers, this would be the perfect place to end this book. And then I was like, oh God, because then that idea wouldn't leave my head. And all I had after the Black moment was like 25K, 1,000 words. And that's it. So like, I was like, for a second book, that sucks. But I couldn't leave it alone. I couldn't not think about it. And so finally I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do this. And I knew that if I couldn't do it for that book and not do it for the subsequent, because it was supposed to be a 3-book interconnected standalone series for 3 different siblings. And I was like, well, now it's 6. Oh, great. And that's how the cliffhanger journey began. And I like that method of storytelling. It's like, I already write I'm writing for television anyway. I have a lot of dialogue. It's very like snappy and fast. And so writing cliffhangers for me is like, I mean, I'm going to show my age, but like, I remember when like old school 90210 would be on, right? And and they would leave you on a cliffhanger and you would just scream at the television. No! Me and my cousin and I would go ballistic and we'd just be like, I need to know what happened with Brandon and Andrea. Like, I mean, you would be like crying and howling about it for like at least an hour afterwards, like just mad. And then sure enough, the next week you would not be late because you needed to know if they were going to actually kiss or not. And they weren't going to, but you didn't know that because you were a teenager. And that is the exciting part, the anticipation coming back and being like, oh, I need to know what happens next. I need to know what happens next. And I love that method of storytelling, which is interesting that I've gone back and I'm doing a single title, but with like a soft cliffhanger for another character. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out because I do love a cliffhanger. It's a really interesting way to tell a story. And then you can tell a bigger story too, with more layers because I don't like simplicity because why would I like it simple and easy? And so I tend to add a lot in anyway. And this way, nothing ever feels rushed. Like, oh, I have to hurry up and close that storyline. So it'll be interesting to see how it works to go back. It's certainly a journey on the new series, but we'll see how it goes.
How much? Because this is a business and like you said, cliffhangers sell differently, right? Or series sell better. And how much of that informs the way that you write? Or how much is it really just you going, you know what? I love this method of storytelling. Is it just sort of serendipitous that they tend to both happen at the same time?
That's a good question. It is serendipitous, I think, because you also get those reviews. Guaranteed, when you write a cliffhanger, I mean, you should have a really thick skin because you're going to get those 1-star reviews. They come quick on release week and you're like, I mean, so nobody likes pain and harassment, but that's sometimes how it works out. And so there are good parts, like, yes, it's more money, but then it's also, you have to write enough to write the story to fit the story you're trying to tell. So like you could have had your life easy and written 70K, or you could write 140K for one story. That's on you. So like, if you're writing more, yes, you're going to charge more, but like, I do love that method of storytelling and I write long. I mean, and it's so funny. Sometimes I'll get the reviews and, people are unhappy that it's a cliffhanger and they're like, she should have just done it in 1 volume. And I was like, okay, well, that was a trilogy, each one at 80,000 words. So you're looking at a 240,000 word novel that's not in KU. Okay, great. Does that make sense to you? And so you see those things and you're like, guys, I know that the story goes fast when we're consuming it. It's like cotton candy. You think you're like, oh, this is great. And it goes quickly. And you're like, well, where did it all go? But they're long stories. So I love the method of storytelling because it does give you room. And you do, if you're writing long, which I tend to do, you do need to charge for that. So, but like, I tend to do after a while, I'll do first in series free. So that brings the cost down for the reader a little bit. And then I'm on Kobo, so I'm, available in libraries. So if the cost is cost prohibitive, grab it from the library. Audios are also available in the library, so that'll make it a little bit easier. But I mean, if you're writing the length of story, I know there are some authors who wrote like 40K and they need to price accordingly. But, when you're getting a hefty book, that price is part of it. And it's not necessarily about making money. It's about if I've done the work, then I should be paid for the work. Because sometimes you don't need to write that long. Like me right now, I told myself I was running a 70,000 word novel, 100K later. And I'm like, what's wrong with me?
I always think that's must be one of the most annoying things about writing is that you spend sometimes years writing a book and then people consume it in a day and are delighted with it. But still, that would drive me insane.
Yes. Yes. I mean, well, it's not so much the consumer in a day because you're like, they loved it. But it's when they come and DM you and you're like, when's the next one? And you're like, are you kidding me?
I just did this one.
Yeah, that's the one where, and you take it in stride because you're happy that they love your work and you're excited that they're excited. But I mean, sometimes you have a small apoplectic fit and you're like, oh. And then you take a breath and you're like, no, but they love the book and I'm so happy they loved it. But goddamn, because I mean, it takes, I mean, you bleed for these stories sometimes. And when you're in revisions and you keep thinking about the people who are DMing you, being like, well, when are we getting the next one? Do you know what?
And you're like, I'm already like dictating from the doctor's office. Okay, guys, I'm doing everything I can.
Right. And you're like, I am in the car on the way to the gyno. I am dictating this book right now. What I need you to do is chill. But I mean, on the other hand, there is that like, they love it. You know, there is that feeling, but whew, sometimes you're like, I mean, I want to get like really British and just like be like, mate, come on. I can just hear all my British friends and just like the string of curses they would let loose. And you're just like, oh, right, that happens all the time. And I feel especially for like the really like huge authors who like, it really takes like a year or more to like really, like, I mean, people are still waiting on George R.R. Martin's next book. Like it'll get there when it gets there.
So as a reader, you've been involved in judging the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize this year. What do you look for when you're reading a great romance? What keeps you going?
I mean, it depends. Every story is a little bit different. But personally, what I like in a story, I like, anyone who's listening is like, oh, she talks fast. I do talk fast, but that's because that's how my brain goes. I really like a snappy, like I want to get dragged by the hair into the story and like not let go. That's what's really exciting for me. There's some stories that take a while to get moving because you do need to like lay groundwork. And I don't even mind that as long as at some point it does drag me in, you know, kicking and screaming and won't let me out. And so, like, those are the kind of books that you're like, you're brushing your teeth and you're reading them. And, you know, like you're like walking through your house and you're reading it. And like, you're like waiting for your kid in the car pickup line and you're reading it. Those are the really exciting ones. So that's what I really love. And then like, I read across genre. So like, I'll read anything from contemporary to historical to vampire to alien. And so as long as like, that's the general quality, I like a really well-paced book that's pacing. I mean, the pacing goes along with the snap and the banter. Like if there's banter and like really good pacing, that makes me really excited. And, you know, I don't read super, super dark. It's not really my general thing, but I have read some things that are like super, super dark. And I'm like, oh, I really dug that. You know, so it's not really about genre for me. It's about kind of like the feeling and like something that's really unavoidable. You can't not read it. And so that's what I'm looking for. And that's a hard quality to find. You know, sometimes people are like, oh, you're really hard on books. And I'm like, am I? I know what I like. And so some friends will be like, I will never forget Candy Ryan. One day she called me, she's like, oh my God, you have to read this book. And it was like some book about a barbarian or whatever. And I read the first, 10 chapters. And I was trying to get into it. And I was like, oh, it's not mine. I mean, I always finish books. So I finished it and I was like, it's fine. But I didn't love it. And she was like, why? And I couldn't pinpoint it. But then I was talking to Sierra Simone and she was like, yeah, like it took too long. There's a lot of warlord things going on. And you were like, the politics weren't interesting enough to keep me engaged. And I was like, I need more. And so she was like, you're hard on books. But I'm like, no, if they're really fun and snappy. So I'm excited to read. I read one of them, which was I'm terrible with titles, Dad Jokes and Pine Cones, I think, which was like super cute, really, really adorable. And so I've been on deadline. So I'm like going to dive into the rest of them next week and then and really dig in. So I'm excited to see what we've got because these are all like the short list. So they really made people excited to read. So I'm excited to read them and see what they're about.
Do you have any tips for writers on pacing and getting that kind of unputdownable quality? Because that's hard. It's intangible.
Yeah, no. The number one thing I would say is read so much. One of the alarming things is I think there are a lot of authors who don't read at all, which I was like, how? Because that's, most of us are here because we loved to read. And I do understand that, like with life and stuff, that like sometimes it falls by the wayside, but I think finding the time to read whenever you can, like I can't read while I'm writing, for example, or in revisions, I can't. But the moment I'm done, man, my TBR list right now is like, come Mondays, like, like the way I will inhale things. And it doesn't matter how you're reading. Like I will listen to an audio while I'm reading Sarah Simone reads hardcovers in the shower. It makes no sense, but like, it doesn't even matter. We were just at the Bridgerton experience this past weekend. She's like, I'm going to read my book. And I was like, in the shower? She's like, yep. And she just scuttled on in. And I was like, I don't even know what to say. But like, however, hardcover, paperback, your e-reader, however, your Kobo e-reader, however you are reading or consuming your media, do that. But like, that's the most important thing. And then you'll start to see, because it will become a second nature, because the more you read, the more you're going to go, I see where they, and you won't even be aware of it, but you will stop reading and you won't know why, but you'll be like, and it'll feel uncomfortable. And like, you'll pick up the book again and maybe the author will write themselves or whatever. But people always say, if you're bored writing it, they're bored reading it. And I was like, And so the way I will like ruthlessly go and cut words that I painstakingly put in, I'm just like, no, slash it, kill it. I don't need it. Unless it is like, if it's information, do it in 2 lines or less, like stick it somewhere else where they get the information, but don't write this whole chapter if it's boring. But that's the number one thing is like, if you don't read, you're not going to be able to understand what snappy pacing looks like. And then in your genre, whatever it is, go and look at the bestsellers, read their backlist, however many. I like to say, read something from when they're like, they started, and read the things that of theirs that are like the most popular. Read those, like consume them, understand how they, like where they went, and so what you'll find a lot in some, especially romance authors, because a lot of us talk about this all the time, is that you started and there was like a sense of magic to it because you didn't know what you didn't know. You didn't know you were breaking rules. You had no idea. You were just like, I'm just doing it. And it was great. And there's like a magic and a flow to it. And the more you write, the more like you self-censor as you go, because you're remembering things that editors have said along the way. And then you're like, and so it feels less smooth and not as full of magic, but there are other ways to capture that magic and bring it back. But that's my biggest advice is you have to read. You must read.
You mentioned audiobooks, and I know that you have a lot of audiobooks yourself. Do you listen to on audio as well as?
Oh, yeah. It's my preferred method of book consumption because I have old lady eyes. And so by 7 p.m., these no longer work right. And so even to conceptualize sitting down with a book after that point is like, my eyes are like, you're kidding, right? We are not doing this. And so I tend to actually read in the morning. So I'll get up early, and if I'm using my eyeballs, I'll like be on the treadmill, just taking a walk or whatever. And I'm like utilizing the eyeballs, and it's just, I can read that way, especially if it's an e-reader. But any other time it's audio. So it's in the car, it's, and especially if I'm not writing at the time and I've just finished a book, man, the audiobooks that are like stacked up waiting for me is not even funny because I commute. I mean, I go get my kid and bring her back. So like, she can't listen to things in the car. So on the way, it's like audio. Anytime I have to go anywhere to an appointment, it's audio. And then when I'm stationary, it's audio or whatever book it's on my e-reader at the time.
Are you one of those people that listens to them speeded up? I feel like you are.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. You have no idea.
Why do people do this? I don't get it.
No, listen. Okay. No, listen. Here's why. If someone is an exceptionally slow talker, it drives me bananas. And you don't meet those people often, but what happens is when I'm listening to audio, because these are trained actors. So like, they're really enunciating and like, really they're reading it. But I was that kid in school and my daughter's the same way. She just rolled up to her teacher the other day and was like, Miss Sugar, can I read ahead? Because this slow reading as a class thing is not working for me. And so I was always reading ahead. Like, I'm just like, I'm faster than you are. Give it to me. And just I needed to get into my brain faster. And there's like a very, very popular male narrator who like women are just like go nuts for his voice. And I would listen to him on my friend's audiobooks and be like, oh my God, he's amazing. He's great. And then I would listen to samples online and be like, oh, I hate him. Why do I hate him? And I recognized that when I would listen to samples online, he was not sped up. And so he sounded like a drunken frat boy to me. And I was like, oh no, don't like it, don't want it. But just a little, and like, I don't even go super fast. I'm like 1.5. I'm just like, just a smidge. And then I was like, yes, this is the perfect tempo. Yeah. It's not like I'm going at like 2 times the speed or something. Just
yeah, no, I do get that. There are some narrators who are slow, but sometimes when it gets fast, it's like it gets higher. It's very weird.
Does it?
Yeah, it gets like high pitched if you go too fast.
Oh yeah, I never go that fast because then I have to pay closer attention because I'm used to fast talkers, but that's because I'm like trying to get the information as quickly as possible. But if I had to talk to a fast talker or someone who's talking faster than me all the time, that would force me to like engage in a level. It's like, oh no, I'm on. I have to be fully paying attention to get everything in. That would be very difficult because then you know you're going to miss something.
That makes sense. Yeah, you don't want to be listening too fast and then everyone sounds like a chipmunk or something.
Oh God, no. With these male narrators, no. You want the deepness in the baritone. You want it.
Exactly. So how do you market your audiobooks versus your ebooks? What do you do to reach that audio listener?
I mean, some of it is like things that have been part of my marketing for years. Like when people click an audio link in my newsletter, I immediately shuffle them to another list. You know, I will do like audio ads. I will, you know, there are specific like Facebook groups or just online groups that like really like have a large audio audience. I do that. And then I partner with the narrators and I'll have them do some like booth time. And so like I'll promote that on Instagram and stuff like that. You can do audio teasers. Like there's a little software program called Headliner, and you can use snippets of the audio that you're pushing out, and you can make like cool like waveforms, and now you can even get cooler fancier because everyone's doing like TikTok videos. So like now you can like actually use a video and put like part of the audio on that. So I mean, there's like all kinds of ways now. Like if you can get creative, I mean, like people are looking for like always looking for traditional marketing, author marketing methods for audio, which is still the same. Like if there's some great audio groups out there that are amazing. Oral Fixation is probably the biggest one that we're all aware of. And that group is run so well. Everyone there's an audio listener. They have like thousands of people. And sometimes before I will even drop an audio, they have got the link already, like Nana Malone's latest audio. And I'm like, how did you even know? It just went live. I mean, they're on it. And then already the fans, because by the time you go see it, you're like, there's 20 comments. I just went live. And so they're really great. So just if you can kind of like Oral Fixation, like I think, like I said, the biggest one, or like some of them are really great. The ones that they're like the narrators have like fan clubs, some of them, like if they're really popular. And if you use one of those narrators, like that fan club will like it's an auto buy. They don't even check to see what it's about. For the more popular narrators, you're like, anything so-and-so does, I'm here for it. And so those are great. So it'll be interesting to see. And then you usually hear about those on Twitter, but it'll be interesting to see, you know, with the new, everyone's like, I'm leaving Twitter. I'm like, no, you're not. Listen, if you haven't left over the last several years, you're not leaving Twitter, please. But you usually find out about those things because the narrators themselves will push it. Or Instagram. I don't know a lot of narrators are super like, because Instagram is like really, well, was mostly photos and now it's videos. But some of the narrators are under pseudonyms and stuff like that, or they don't show their faces or things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how narrators like start also doing their part in the promotion with all the changes that are happening. But yeah, so that's really what I do. But number one is newsletter. Your newsletter people are there. And then like sometimes you'll get people who are like die hard. I only read the ebook or paperback. And then you play a snippet of like some narrator's hot voice and they're like, I bought my first audio. And you're like, yeah, you did. Of course.
Love that. All right. Last question. What is on your TBR list on Friday when you hit your deadline?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. Finishing up dating Dr. Dill for our Nipple Challenge chat on the 2nd. And then next is Anna Huang Wicked Games. Those two, definitely, because those have been on my list. And then there's like, I started going through a historical phase, after Bridgerton. And so I've got Sarah McLean on there. And then I've got, let's see, Brittany Sahane. She does kind of like grittier suspense. Yeah. So those are like the immediate ones that I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna inhale those. But yeah, Dating Dr. Jill is like number one. Cause I had started it and then my deadline was like actually looming and I was like, stop it. Stop playing with your time. And I was really cranky about it too, but that's the number one thing I'm going back to.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will let you get back to your deadline. Before you go, can you tell us where we can find you online?
Yes, I'm super easy to find. You can go to my website, nanamalone.com, or you can find me primarily on Instagram at Nana Malone Writer, occasionally on Facebook, Nana Malone Writer. And I'm on Twitter, but I'm not on Twitter, guys. Oh, and on TikTok, I'm Nana Malone Writer. So I'm pretty simple, but check my website first, and because that'll have the most latest updates anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. I had fun.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Nana's books, we will include links in our show notes. If you are enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. Be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram.
This episode was produced by Laura Granger and Joni DiClacito. Our editor is Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and huge thanks to Nana Malone for being a guest. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.